Employee kicks NAS out of expensive store. The ending was historic. The morning sun hadn't yet reached the towering glass windows of Rich and Royal, Manhattan's most exclusive watch boutique, when Mike Chen arrived for his shift. 6 years of working here had taught him the morning routine by heart. Check the humidity controls, adjust the lighting to make the diamonds dance, and prepare the champagne for the day's wealthy clients. "Morning, beautiful," he whispered to a particularly stunning Patek Philippe, wiping an imaginary smudge from its display case. The watch cost more than his parents' house back in Queens, but that didn't bother him anymore. This was his world now. The security guard, James, watched him with amusement. "Man, you really love these things, don't you?" "They're not things, James. They're works of art." Mike straightened his designer tie. "A gift from a grateful client. You know what my father used to say about watches?" "Here we go again." James chuckled, settling into his usual spot by the door. "Time is the only true luxury," Mike continued, ignoring him. "Everyone gets the same 24 hours, but how you measure them, that's what sets you apart." The morning crowd started trickling in, the usual mix of Wall Street types and foreign tourists. Mike had gotten good at spotting the serious buyers. The young tech entrepreneur in wrinkled khakis but wearing a vintage Rolex? Potential client. The loud group taking selfies with everything? Not worth his time. "Excuse me," a woman in her 50s approached, designer handbag clutched tight. "My son just made partner at Goldman. I want to get him something special." Mike's professional smile appeared instantly. "Congratulations, madam. Please, have a seat. Christina, could you bring us some champagne?" He gestured to his assistant, who nodded efficiently. Now, for a young professional, I might suggest. The morning passed in a blur of sales and subtle flattery. By lunch, Mike had already exceeded his daily quota. He was reviewing the morning's receipts when his colleague Sarah rushed over, eyes wide. "Mike, oh my God, you'll never believe who just walked into Bergdorf's across the street." She pressed against the window, peering out. "Leonardo DiCaprio, in a baseball cap and hoodie, but I swear it's him." Mike joined her at the window. "Celebrities," he scoffed, "always trying to look normal. Like we don't know those hoodies probably cost thousands." "Not everyone wants to peacock around the city," James commented from his post. Mike rolled his eyes. "When you're spending serious money, you should look the part. It's about respect." The afternoon crowd was thinner, typical for a Tuesday. Mike used the quiet time to mentor Christina, the new sales associate. "Look, it's simple. Our clients aren't just buying watches. They're buying membership to an exclusive club. They want to feel special, different from the regular people outside." "But what about younger clients?" Christina asked. "I've read that millennials are changing luxury." "Please," Mike cut her off. "I've been here 6 years. Trust me, real money has a certain look. You'll learn to spot it." Around 3, a group of businessmen in sharp suits came in. Mike straightened immediately, but they gravitated towards Sarah's counter. He watched her work with approval. She knew to pull out the most expensive pieces first. The store's iPhone chimed with a message from corporate. "Reminder: new limited edition piece arriving tomorrow. Client list attached. VIP preview event next week." Mike scrolled through the client list, memorizing names and preferences. This was why he was the top seller. Attention to detail. He knew which clients collected sports models, who preferred complications, whose wives had anniversaries coming up. "Heads up," James said quietly into his radio. Group of young guys outside looking in. Mike tensed slightly. They'd had problems with groups before, people coming in just to take Instagram photos, wasting time, sometimes even trying to pull scams. "I'll handle it," he told Christina, who looked nervous. But the group moved on, and Mike relaxed. The afternoon sun made the displays glow, and he took a moment to adjust a few pieces that had been handled during the day. Each watch face reflected his own, clean-shaven, hair perfectly styled, not a wrinkle in his bespoke suit. He looked like he belonged here, among these pieces of functional art. "You did good with that partner's mom this morning," James commented during a quiet moment. "Saw her face when you mentioned the waiting list. Thought she was gonna cry." Mike smiled. "Little secret? There is no waiting list for that model. But now she thinks she's getting something extra special." "Man, you're cold," James laughed. What happened to that kid who started here all wide-eyed? The question hit harder than James probably intended. Mike remembered his first day, how overwhelmed he'd felt. The watches in the cases cost more than he'd made in his entire life up to that point. But he'd learned quickly. Learned to hide his Queen's accent. Learned to spot rich people. Learned to be the kind of person they wanted to buy from. The afternoon lull continued. Mike used the time to call some regular clients about the upcoming VIP event. Each conversation was a careful dance of exclusivity and flattery. "Yes, Mr. Robertson, we thought of you immediately for this piece. Of course, Mrs. Chen, we can arrange a private viewing." Sarah was helping an elderly gentleman with some vintage pieces when the door chimed again. Mike glanced up automatically, then quickly looked down at his phone. The man who walked in wore baggy jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, hands stuffed in his pockets. Mike exchanged a look with James, who had tensed slightly. The man's sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor as he approached the Patek Philippe display. Mike waited, hoping he would just look and leave. But the man bent closer to the glass, his breath leaving a small fog on the surface. Something in Mike snapped. 6 years of building this perfect world of luxury and exclusivity, and people still walked in off the street thinking they could waste his time. He stepped forward, voice carrying that particular tone he'd perfected for situations like this. "Can I help you?" The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. "You don't belong here." The man glanced up, hood partially obscuring his face. "Yeah, let me see that one." He pointed to a Grand Complications piece priced at $520,000. Mike didn't move. "Sir, this is a very exclusive establishment. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of our more accessible competitors?" The man was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, he pulled back his hood. Mike's heart stopped. The face that emerged was one he'd seen countless times. On albums, in magazines, in documentaries about hip-hop history. It was Nas. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Nas's eyes held his, and in them, Mike saw something that made his stomach turn, not anger, but a deep, weary recognition, like he'd been through this 1,000 times before. Without a word, Nas pulled out his phone, snapped a quick picture of Mike's name tag, and turned to leave. His sneakers squeaked once more on the marble floor, and then he was gone, leaving behind only the faint shadow of his breath on the display case. Christina broke the silence first. "Mike, do you know who that was?" But Mike couldn't answer. He stood frozen, watching through the window as one of hip-hop's biggest legends and most noted watch collectors walked away from what would have been one of the biggest sales of the year. More than that, he watched his own reflection in the glass, seeing himself, really seeing himself, for the first time in years. "That was Nas," James said quietly, shaking his head. "Man's got one of the best watch collections in the game. That Patek he was looking at probably would have been one of his cheaper pieces." Sarah rushed over, her face pale. "Mike, what did you do? That's Nas. He's been collecting watches since before you were even born." The elderly gentleman Sarah had been helping looked up from the vintage pieces. "Nasir Jones? I remember when he came into my shop back in '94, just after Illmatic dropped. Boy knew his timepieces even then. Bought a vintage Cartier. Paid cash." Mike's legs felt weak. He grabbed the edge of the counter, steadying himself. The store suddenly felt too bright, too quiet, too sterile. The watches in their perfect cases seemed to be staring at him accusingly. Christina approached cautiously. Should we call him back? Maybe apologize?" "No," Mike said, his voice barely a whisper. "The damage is done." A young couple walked in, but Mike barely noticed them. Sarah quickly moved to help them, shooting Mike a concerned look. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably another client about the VIP event, but he couldn't bring himself to check it. "I need some air," he muttered, heading toward the back room. But before he could reach it, Mrs. Wilson, the store manager, emerged from her office. "Mike, a word, please." Her voice was calm, but Mike knew that tone. It was the same one he'd just used with Nas, polite on the surface, ice underneath. He followed her into the office, where she closed the door quietly behind them. "Would you like to explain what just happened?" Mrs. Wilson sat behind her desk, her expression unreadable. Mike opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? That he'd profiled a legendary artist and collector? That 6 years of working here had turned him into exactly the kind of person he used to hate? I didn't recognize him, he finally managed. That's not the point, is it? Mrs. Wilson leaned forward. Whether it was Nas or any other customer, what you did goes against everything we stand for, or at least everything we're supposed to stand for. She turned her computer monitor toward him. A security camera feed showed the entire interaction from multiple angles. It looked even worse than it had felt. His dismissive posture, the barely concealed contempt in his expression. The thing is, Mike, Mrs. Wilson continued, this isn't the first time, is it? We've had complaints before. The young tech entrepreneur last month? The woman in workout clothes who turned out to be a hedge fund CEO? Mike's stomach churned. He remembered them all. The subtle ways he'd made them feel unwelcome. The assumptions he'd made. He justified it to himself each time, maintaining the store's exclusive atmosphere, protecting their high-end image. I thought. He started, then stopped. What had he thought? That he was doing his job? That he was protecting some imaginary standard? A commotion from the main floor interrupted them. Through the office window, Mike could see people gathering outside the store, phones raised. Some were pointing, others were clearly recording videos. Mrs. Wilson's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked back at Mike, her expression grave. It's already on social media. Someone recorded the whole thing. Mike sank into a chair, his perfectly pressed suit suddenly feeling like a costume. He thought about his journey, from the eager kid from Queens who'd landed his dream job to this. When had he started seeing people as walking dollar signs? When had he started judging books by their covers? Go home, Mike, Mrs. Wilson said quietly. Take the rest of the day. We'll need to discuss this further tomorrow. As Mike gathered his things, he could hear the whispers from his colleagues. Christina was already on her phone, probably checking social media. James wouldn't meet his eye. Sarah looked like she wanted to say something, but turned away when he passed. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fifth Avenue. A group of teenagers pointed at him as he walked past, whispering behind their hands. He kept his head down, hurrying toward the subway station. His phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert. His heart sank as he read the headline. Hip-hop legend, Nas, allegedly discriminated against at luxury watch store. The story was spreading, and it was spreading fast. On the subway ride home, Mike's mind raced back through all his interactions over the years. How many other people had he judged unfairly? How many potential relationships, sales, and connections had he destroyed with his prejudices? The though made him feel sick. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, but he couldn't bear to look at them. The familiar route home felt different somehow, as if the city itself was judging him. As he walked past the local mall, the same one he'd smugly suggested Nas visit instead, he caught his reflection in the window. The expensive suit, the perfectly styled hair, the cultivated air of sophistication, it all felt hollow now. By the time he reached his apartment, the sun had set, taking with it the last remnants of the life he'd carefully built over 6 years. Tomorrow would bring its own storms, but for now, all he could do was sit in the growing darkness, haunted by the look in Nas's eyes. A look that said this wasn't the first time, and probably wouldn't be the last. The watches he'd sold that morning felt like a lifetime ago. His father's words echoed in his mind. Time is the only true luxury. Mike wondered how many precious moments he'd wasted trying to be someone he wasn't, judging people he didn't know, forgetting where he came from. His phone buzzed one final time. A message from his mother. I saw the video, it read. We need to talk. Mike's phone alarm went off at 6 a.m. as usual, but he hadn't slept. He'd spent the night watching his life unravel on social media, each notification another nail in the coffin of his career. The video had gone viral faster than he could have imagined. His hands shaking, he opened Instagram again. The original video, posted by a customer named at Luxury Watch Lover, already had over 2 million views. Watch this rich and royal employee profile and disrespect Nas. Yes, that Nas, one of the biggest watch collectors in the game. Number racism. Number luxury retail. Number this is America. The comments scrolled endlessly. This is what we deal with every day. Man's wearing a $30,000 watch while getting profiled. Esme, rich and royal, about to be poor and canceled Rue. His phone rang, his sister Janet. He almost didn't answer, but she'd just keep calling. Mike, what the hell? Her voice was a mix of anger and concern. Mom's been crying all night. Jam, I can't right now. No, you're going to listen. Do you remember when we were kids and that security guard followed us around the electronics store? Remember how mad you were? How did you become that guy, Mike? The memory hit him hard. He'd been 13, saving up for months to buy a gaming console. The guard had made them feel like criminals just for looking. It's different, he started, but the words felt hollow. How? Because you're wearing an expensive suit now? Because you think you're better than where we came from? His other phone line beeped. The store. I have to go, Jan. Work's calling. Of course they are. Just call Mom, okay? She needs to hear from you. He switched lines. Hello? Mike. Mrs. Wilson's voice was tense. Have you seen Nas's Instagram post? His heart sank. No, I'm sending it to you now. Don't come in today. We need to assess the situation. The post loaded on his screen. There was Nas, looking straight into the camera, wearing the same hoodie from yesterday. The caption made Mike's stomach turn. Just tried to drop $500,000 at Rich and Royal. Got treated like I was there to steal something. Same story, different day. Been collecting watches since '94, got pieces worth more than some people's stores. But some folks only see what they want to see. To the young king who showed me the door, hope that commission was worth it. Dub number, Rich and Royal number, do your homework. The post had over 1 million likes already. Celebrity comments were pouring in. Kevin Hart. Same thing happened to me in Vegas before they knew who I was. We gotta do better. DJ Khaled. They don't want us to have nice things. But we got 'em anyway. Mark Wahlberg. Nas got one of the best collections I've ever seen. Their loss. Mike's doorbell rang, making him jump. Through the peephole, he saw Christina from work. I brought coffee, she said through the door. And you should probably see what's happening at the store. He let her in, noticing how she hesitated before stepping inside. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Thanks, he said, taking the coffee. How bad is it? She pulled out her phone, showing him a live stream. There was a small crowd gathered outside Rich and Royal, some holding signs. Money can't buy respect, and do better. James says there's news vans now, Christina said. And Twitter, Mike. They found everything. Your LinkedIn, your Facebook, even your old MySpace pictures. My what? He grabbed his laptop, hands shaking as he Googled his own name. Pages of results, all from the last 12 hours. Someone had even made a Twitter thread analyzing his past social media posts, looking for other evidence of bias. His phone buzzed with a text from his girlfriend, Rebecca. We need to talk, in person. Can you come over? I have to go, he told Christina. Thanks for the coffee. The 7-block walk to Rebecca's apartment felt like running a gauntlet. He felt eyes on him everywhere, wondered if people recognized him from the video. A group of teenagers pointed and whispered as he passed. Rebecca answered her door in workout clothes, her face set. I saw the video. Beck, I can explain. Can you? Because I've been trying to explain it to my friends all night. Do you know how many texts I've gotten? Isn't your boyfriend that racist watch guy? I'm not racist. I just what? Just assumed a black man in casual clothes couldn't afford a luxury watch. Do you know what that makes you sound like? She ran her hands through her hair in frustration. The worst part is, I'm not even surprised. The comments you make sometimes, I just let them slide. But this. What are you saying? I'm saying I can't do this. I can't be with someone who treats people like that, who embarrasses me like that. Beck, please. Just go, Mike. I'll mail you your stuff. The door closed in his face. He stood there for a moment, feeling like he was watching his life play out from outside his body. His phone buzzed again. More notifications. Back in his apartment, he finally worked up the courage to call his mother. Michael. Her voice was quiet, disappointed. I saw the video. Mom, your father and I didn't raise you like this. Remember when you first got that job? How proud you were to tell us. I'm going to help people find their dream watches, you said. When did that turn into this? I was just doing my job, he whispered. Your job is to judge people? To make them feel small? Your grandfather wore the same watch for 40 years. A Timex your grandmother saved up to buy him. Was he less worthy of respect? The mention of his grandfather broke something in him. The tears he'd been holding back all day finally came. I don't know who I am anymore, Mom. I don't either, Michael. I don't either. After hanging up, he made the mistake of checking Twitter again. His name was trending. Someone had dug up his old yearbook quote, "Success is about rising above where you came from." The irony wasn't lost on him. A new email notification popped up from Rich and Royal Corporate. Dear Mr. Chen, in light of recent events, we are placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Please do not report to work or contact any clients until further notice. Please be advised that any media inquiries should be directed to our PR department. Regards, Human Resources. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Is this Mike Chen? A man's voice professional measured. Yes? This is David Cooper from the New York Times. We're running a story about the incident at Rich and Royal. Would you like to comment? Mike ended the call, his hands shaking. Another notification. Someone had found his old Instagram posts about maintaining standards at the store and was doing a thread analyzing them for racist dog whistles. The buzzing of his phone was becoming unbearable. Each notification felt like another accusation. He turned it off, but the silence was almost worse. The sun was setting when someone knocked on his door again. This time it was James, still in his security uniform. Thought you might need this, he said, holding up a paper bag. The smell of Chinese food wafted out. Mike let him in, grateful for the company. Remember your first day? James asked, unpacking containers of Kung Pao chicken. You were so nervous, kept adjusting your tie every 5 minutes. Feels like a lifetime ago. You were different then. Hungry, yeah, but not like you became. When did I change, James? When did I turn into this? James considered the question while opening a container of rice. Gradually. First it was little things. The way you'd tense up when certain people walked in. The assumptions you'd make. Then it got bigger. Like you were playing a role and forgot it was just a role. I just wanted to belong there. By making sure others didn't? James shook his head. Man, I watched you do it. Should have said something sooner. That's on me, too. Mike's laptop chimed with a new email notification. Another journalist requesting comment. The story was growing beyond the luxury watch world now, becoming part of a larger conversation about racism in high-end retail. What do I do now? Mike asked, more to himself than James. First, you eat. Then, maybe you start thinking about who you really want to be. Because that guy in the video? That ain't you. At least it didn't used to be. They ate in silence for a while, the city noise filtering in through the windows. Somewhere out there, Nas was probably at home with his incredible watch collection. Mike wondered if he was wearing the piece he'd tried to look at, the one Mike hadn't even given him a chance to see up close. Store's probably going to fire me, Mike said finally. Probably. But maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe you needed a wake-up call. After James left, Mike finally worked up the courage to look at his phone again. Hundreds of missed calls, thousands of notifications. But one message caught his eye. From his old mentor at his first job, Mr. Thompson. Saw what happened. Remember what I taught you about watches? Every tick is a second chance. What matters is what you do with those chances. Call me when you're ready to talk. Mike looked at his own watch, the first luxury piece he'd bought with his Rich and Royal commission. He'd been so proud of it, showing it off to his family. Now it felt heavy on his wrist, like it was weighing him down with everything he'd become. He took it off, placing it on his nightstand. For the first time in years, he fell asleep, without the soft ticking of a luxury timepiece counting down the seconds of his life. Outside his window, the city kept moving, indifferent to his personal crisis. Tomorrow would bring more fallout, more consequences, more hard looks in the mirror. But for now, in the darkness of his apartment, Mike Chen was just a man realizing that the image he'd built of himself had finally, catastrophically shattered. The next morning brought no relief. Mike woke to his building superintendent knocking on his door. Mr. Chen? There's reporters in the lobby. They're asking about you. Mike peeked through his blinds. Sure enough, 3 news vans were parked outside. His phone, which he'd finally turned back on, immediately exploded with notifications. A new wave of social media posts had started after people on the West Coast woke up. His sister Janet texted, "Turn on CNN." With shaking hands, he grabbed his remote. There it was, his face, taken from his LinkedIn profile, next to a photo of Nas. The headline crawled across the bottom. Luxury watch store employees' treatment of hip-hop legend sparks nationwide conversation. This incident, a commentator was saying, highlights the ongoing issue of retail discrimination. Many successful people of color have come forward sharing similar experiences. His phone rang, a number he recognized. Mrs. Wilson. "Mike," she sounded exhausted. "The corporate crisis team is flying in from Switzerland. They want to meet with you tomorrow." "Am I fired?" A long pause. "They're exploring all options. But Mike, it's bad. The watch forums are on fire. Every major collector is weighing in. They found posts where Nas showed off his collection. Pieces worth millions. He's friends with half the CEOs in the industry." Someone knocked on his door again. Through the peephole, he saw a woman with a microphone. "Channel 7 News? Mr. Chen, we'd like your side of the story." He backed away from the door, bumping into his watch display case. The expensive timepieces he'd collected over the years stared back at him accusingly. Each one represented a sale, a commission, a step up in his artificial world of luxury and exclusivity. His phone buzzed with a text from Christina. "People are leaving one-star reviews on every rich and royal social media page. They're demanding action." Then another text, this one from Sarah. "TMZ found your old college blog posts, the ones about elevating yourself above the common people. Mike, what were you thinking?" He hadn't even remembered writing those. 6 years of pretending to be something he wasn't had seeped into every aspect of his life, leaving a digital trail of evidence. The buzzer rang again. This time it was the building manager. "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry, but the reporters are disrupting other tenants. We need to address this situation." His phone kept buzzing. Is this the same Mike Chen who gave that speech at the luxury retail conference about maintaining standards? Twitter? Found his old Instagram. Check out all these posts about real luxury customers, number racist and royal. Twitter. At Mike Chen. "Remember when you wouldn't let my brother try on that Rolex? Karma's real bro say." Instagram. He scrolled through his own social media history with growing horror. Years of posts, each one showing his transformation from an eager young salesman to this. Photos at luxury events, captions about quality clientele, subtle digs at people who didn't fit his idea of high-end retail. His mother called again. "The neighbors saw you on television?" she said quietly. "Mrs. Park from the grocery store. She asked me if you were the same little boy who used to help bag groceries. What happened to that boy, Michael?" Before he could answer, his phone beeped with an email from Rich and Royal's PR team. "Urgent. Media statement required. Draft attached for your review. Please confirm if you agree with the following. I deeply regret my actions and acknowledge that they were inconsistent with Rich and Royal's values of inclusion and respect. I am taking time to reflect and educate myself. Please respond ASAP." Another text from James. "Protesters outside the store are holding signs with your face on them. This isn't going away, man." Mike sank onto his couch, surrounded by the trappings of the life he'd built, the expensive art he didn't really understand, the designer furniture he'd bought to impress dates, the watch winder humming quietly in the corner, keeping his collection ticking away. A new notification popped up. Someone had found and shared his father's obituary from 10 years ago. The morning sun crept through Mike's blinds, finding him exactly where he'd been for the past 3 days, on his couch, surrounded by takeout containers and unwashed clothes. His phone had died sometime yesterday, and he hadn't bothered to charge it. A knock at the door made him flinch. "Mike, it's Janet. Open up, or I'm using my emergency key." He didn't move. The lock clicked anyway, and his sister stepped into the apartment, wrinkling her nose. "Jesus, Mike, when's the last time you showered?" He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. Janet moved around the apartment, opening windows, collecting empty containers. "You can't hide in here forever," she said, picking up his dead phone. "The world's still out there." Maybe I don't want to be part of that world anymore. Janet plugged in his phone. As it powered up, notifications began flooding in immediately. She glanced at the screen and winced. They fired Rebecca, Mike said quietly. Her PR firm said they couldn't have an employee associated with someone like me. I know, she called Mom. The phone kept buzzing. Janet scrolled through the messages. Corporate wants to meet with you tomorrow. 3 interview requests. Mom's called 12 times and… She paused. Oh. What? Someone started a GoFundMe. Send Mike Chen back to Queens where he belongs. They've raised enough for a one-way bus ticket. Mike laughed hollowly. Might not be a bad idea. Stop it. Janet sat beside him. This isn't the brother I know. The Mike I grew up with would fight. Fight what? They're right about me. Everything they're saying, they're right. His phone rang, Mrs. Wilson again. Janet answered before he could stop her. Hello? Yes, this is his sister. He's here. One moment. She held out the phone. Take it. It's time to face the music. Mike's hand shook as he took the phone. Hello? Mike. Mrs. Wilson's voice was gentler than he expected. The board has made their decision. They want to meet tomorrow at 9 a.m. in person. To fire me? To discuss options. Mike, they're worried about lawsuits. Civil rights groups are involved now. It's bigger than just you and Nas. After hanging up, Mike finally looked around his apartment properly. Designer watches worth hundreds of thousands of dollars sat in their cases, collecting dust. The irony wasn't lost on him. You know what the worst part is? He said to Janet. I can't even remember when I started changing. It was so gradual. A snide comment here, an assumption there. I remember, Janet said quietly. It was that charity gala 2 years ago. You were supposed to take Mom, but you said she wouldn't fit in with that crowd. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Their mother had bought a new dress, specially for the event. Another knock at the door. This time, it was James, still in his security uniform. Thought you might want to know, he said, stepping inside. They hired security for tomorrow's meeting, expecting protesters. Mike's stomach churned. How many? The hashtag number Boycott Rich and Royal has over 1 million posts now. People are calling for a complete overhaul of luxury retail hiring practices. You've become kind of a symbol. A symbol of what? Everything that's wrong with the industry. James sat heavily on an armchair. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe this needed to happen. Mike's phone buzzed again, a text from Christina. They're interviewing replacements already. The new guy asked if we have a dress code for customers. You need to shower, Janet announced, pulling Mike to his feet. You're not facing the board looking like this. As hot water ran over his shoulders, Mike caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles under his eyes, 3 days of stubble, hair a mess. Nothing like the polished luxury salesman he'd crafted himself into. Back in the living room, Janet and James were talking quietly. They found his college application essay, Janet was saying. The one about growing up working in Dad's repair shop, learning the value of every timepiece regardless of its price tag. Damn, James shook his head. Man really did a complete 180. Mike's phone rang again, a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Chen? This is Marcus Thompson from the Luxury Retail Association. Given recent events, we'll need you to step down from the diversity committee. Mike had forgotten he was even on it. Another piece of his carefully constructed life falling away. After hanging up, he noticed Janet staring at his watch collection. Remember when Dad used to let us wind his old Seiko? She asked. Said every tick was the heartbeat of time itself. Stop, Mike whispered. No, you need to hear this. That Seiko kept better time than half these fancy pieces, and Dad treated it with more respect than you've shown anyone lately. James stood up. They're setting up barriers outside the corporate office already. Tomorrow's going to be intense. Mike nodded numbly. His phone buzzed with another text from Sarah this time. Hey, for what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. About the way you treated certain customers. We all saw it. We all stayed quiet. Janet picked up one of his watches, a rare Patek Philippe similar to the one Nas had wanted to see. How much did this cost? She asked. 300,000. And how much did Dad charge to replace watch batteries? $10. The memory stung. No matter what kind of watch it was. Because? Because everyone's time is equally valuable. Mike's voice cracked. That's what he always said. Another knock at the door made them all jump. This time it was Mrs. Chen, their mother, holding a paper bag. "I brought soup," she said simply. "You look terrible." Mike couldn't meet her eyes. "Mom, sit, eat." She moved to the kitchen, familiar with the space despite rarely visiting. "When you were little, you used to say you wanted to be just like your father. What happened to that boy?" "I thought I knew better." Mike stirred the soup without eating it. "Thought I'd evolved past all that." "Evolved?" His mother's voice sharpened. "Your father treated billionaires and bus drivers the same way. He respected their watches, their time, their humanity. That's true evolution." The soup grew cold as they sat in heavy silence. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the small apartment. Mike's phone buzzed one last time, an email from Rich and Royal's PR team with tomorrow's prepared statement for him to review. The carefully crafted corporate apology felt hollow, just like everything else in his life had become. "I can't do this," he said suddenly. "I can't read some PR statement and pretend it makes everything okay." "Then don't," James said. "Be real for once." "Real?" Mike laughed bitterly. "I don't even know what that means anymore." Janet picked up his phone, scrolling through more messages. "They're calling you the face of luxury retail racism. Your old sales training videos are going viral, the ones where you talk about identifying serious buyers." Their mother stood up abruptly. "Enough, Michael. Look at me." He forced himself to meet her eyes. "Tomorrow, you will face them. Not as this person you pretended to be, but as my son. As John Chen's son. A boy who grew up understanding that every person who walked into our shop deserved respect." "It's too late," Mike whispered. "It's never too late to remember who you are." The night grew deeper. James and Janet left, promising to pick him up tomorrow. His mother stayed, quietly cleaning the apartment like she used to clean the old watch shop. Mike sat in the darkness, surrounded by the ticking of his expensive collection. Each sound felt like an accusation now, a reminder of how far he'd strayed from his father's simple philosophy. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: the board, the protesters, the media. But tonight, in his apartment, filled with the gentle ticking of timepieces, Mike Chen finally began to understand the true cost of forgetting where he came from. His mother's voice came from the kitchen, soft and sad. "Your father used to say every watch tells two stories, the one on its face and the one in its heart. What story are you telling now, Michael?" He had no answer. The watches kept ticking, counting down the hours until he would have to face the world again, this time without the armor of his artificial persona. In the morning, he would put on another expensive suit, strap on another expensive watch. But for the first time in years, he felt the weight of them for what they truly were, not symbols of success, but chains he'd forged himself, link by link, choice by choice, until they'd bound him into someone he never meant to become. Dawn came too quickly. Mike stood in front of his closet, staring at rows of perfectly tailored suits. "Not that one," his mother said from the doorway. She'd slept on his couch, refusing to leave him alone. "The gray one, the one you wore to your father's funeral, Mom. It's the only one he ever saw you wear, the only one that matters." As he dressed, his mother went through his watch collection. She picked up piece after piece, examining each one with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades around timepieces. "This one," she said finally, holding up his first luxury watch, the one he'd bought with his first big commission. "Remember what you said when you showed it to your father?" Mike's throat tightened. "I said I'd finally made it." "And what did he say?" He said the only way to know if you've made it is to see how you treat people who haven't." The doorbell rang, Janet and James, right on time. Mike's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Wilson. "Media already gathered outside the office. Car waiting for you in the underground garage." His mother straightened his tie one last time. "Remember who you are, Michael, not who you pretended to be." The ride to Rich and Royal's corporate office was tense. Through tinted windows, they could see protesters gathering, their signs visible in the early morning light. Time for change, and luxury has no color. "Look," Janet pointed at her phone. Nas just posted again. Mike's hands shook as he read the post. Getting a lot of hate in my DMs about ruining this man's life. That wasn't the goal. But sometimes it takes a hard fall to remember how to walk right. Hope my guy learns something from this. Number timeless lesson. The comments were flooding in. Nas always taking the high road. Too kind. I wouldn't have been so forgiving. This is why Nas is a legend. Not just for music, but for how he handles himself. The car pulled into the underground garage. 2 security guards approached. Mr. Chen? This way, please. The board is waiting. His mother squeezed his hand one last time. Remember, your father fixed watches for everyone. From Rolex to Casio, he treated each one like it held someone's dreams. The elevator ride felt eternal. Mike could hear his pulse in his ears, keeping time with the soft mechanical whir of the ascending car. The boardroom was packed. Executives in expensive suits, PR representatives with worried expressions, lawyers shuffling papers. Mrs. Wilson stood when he entered. Mike, please, sit. He took his place at the end of the long table, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The CEO, Mr. Harrison, spoke first. We've prepared a statement for you to read. A public apology, followed by your resignation. Mike looked at the paper they slid across to him. Corporate language, carefully crafted to minimize liability. We'll provide 6-month severance, Mr. Harrison continued. In exchange for your silence about any discriminatory practices you may have witnessed during your employment. Mike's hand went to his watch, his first luxury piece, the one his mother had chosen this morning. He could feel every tick against his wrist. Mr. Chen? One of the lawyers prompted. Do you understand the terms? Mike looked around the room, at the faces of people who'd praised his sales techniques, promoted his customer screening methods, celebrated his ability to maintain the store's exclusive atmosphere. My father, he said quietly, used to keep a jar of cheap batteries in his shop, the kind that cost $1 each. Next to it was a jar of expensive ones, $20 each. The room was silent, confused by this unexpected turn. He'd use the expensive ones, in Rolexes, Omegas, all the luxury brands. But sometimes, someone would come in with a cheap watch, maybe their only watch. And he'd use the expensive battery anyway. Said every watch deserves the best heart you can give it. Mr. Chen, Mr. Harrison interrupted. This is hardly the time for. It's exactly the time. Mike's voice grew stronger. Because I forgot that lesson. We all did. We created a world where we judge people's worth by what they wear, how they look, what we think they can afford. And we call it maintaining standards instead of what it really is. The PR team was frantically writing notes. One of the lawyers started to speak, but Mike continued. I won't read your statement. I won't pretend this was just one mistake by one employee. This is about an entire culture we've built, one I helped build, and I'm done. He stood up, hands steady for the first time in days. I'll resign, but I'll do it my way. Tell the truth about what we've been doing, the profiles we create, the assumptions we make, the people we make feel small to make others feel big. That would be inadvisable, a lawyer cut in. The confidentiality agreement in your contract. Sue me. Mike took off his watch and placed it on the table. Some things are worth more than money. My father taught me that before I forgot who I was. He walked out of the boardroom, past the stunned executives, past the security guards, and straight to the lobby where protesters were gathered. Media cameras turned toward him as he pushed through the revolving doors. Microphones appeared in front of his face. Mr. Chen, do you have a statement? He looked directly into the nearest camera, seeing his mother's face in his mind. I have a lot to say. About who we've been, who we are, and who we need to become. And I'm ready to say it all. Behind him, PR representatives were rushing out, trying to damage control. But Mike Chen, son of a watch repairman from Queens, finally felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The watches would keep ticking, marking time in their perfect, precise way. But for the first time in years, he could hear their real message, the one his father had tried to teach him. That time passes the same for everyone, and how we spend it is what truly matters. A week later, Nas did something nobody expected. He posted a new video, asking people to stop threatening Mike. Hate doesn't fix hate, he said. Let's turn this into something real. He invited Mike to meet him at a small coffee shop. No cameras, no publicity. Just two men and some hard truth. Mike walked in shaking. Nas was already there, wearing the same hoodie from that day. For 3 hours they talked, really talked. About racism, about assumptions, about pain. About growing up and learning hard lessons. You know what's crazy? Nas said. That watch I wanted to buy was going to be a gift for my son. Wanted him to have something special. But maybe this right here, this conversation, that's the real gift, showing him that people can change. Mike quit his job at the watch store. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He started working with youth programs, sharing his story, teaching kids about respect and judgment. And every time he spoke, he wore a simple watch Nas had given him. Nothing fancy, just a reminder that time changes everything, including people. The video of Mike's mistake will live online forever. But now it's not just a story about racism in a fancy store. It's a story about owning up to your wrongs, about facing yourself in the mirror, and about how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes. As for Nas, he never did buy that watch. Instead, he and Mike started a mentorship program together, helping young people break into luxury retail. Turns out, some things are worth more than even the fanciest watch in the world.